parts is the part about the sin, not imputing our sin. Back to like we think of God like the great and powerful Oz, like he's void of emotion, he's indifferent, he's just like up there.
Yeah, right.
And so we don't consider that there's a reason why he didn't impute our sin to us. He felt something. And so what was it? See, we don't ever talk about that.
No.
We don't talk about the heart of God behind these things. We just say God didn't impute our sin to us. But why not? Why didn't he? Why didn't he impute our sin to us? Why didn't he want to impute our sin to us? Right?
It had been stuck on us.
He didn't want us to die.
Right.
He did. That's right. He didn't want us to die.
It was contrary to his dream.
He
Right.
didn't want us to die.
He brought life. He wants us to live.
That's right. What is it? The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy.
Right.
But God has come that we might have life.
Yes.
And so God didn't impute our sin to us because he didn't want us to die. And it wasn't just like a rolling the dice kind of thing. Well, we'll flip a coin. Let's see if we want him to die or not. Well, okay, it's head, so we don't want him to die.
Right.
It wasn't like that. God was moved in the deepest part of his being by our suffering.
Amen.
And so when he come upon us and saw us in our blood, saw death reigning over us, it moved him in the deepest part of his being with compassion. Right? He found something in him that said, I never created them for death. I never created them to even be encountered with death, much less for death to be joined to them. He felt grieved inside. He felt like this wasn't right for his people to be dying. He was moved on the inside. I think the example I used is Beaches. Have you guys seen that movie?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard that you're my hero? Well, I forgot about that movie, but I was feeling this thing when I was watching the end of that. And it's tough to describe what you're feeling, but every human being has felt it at some point. And all of a sudden, God said, that's what I felt when you guys were dying. And it just floored me. And that was Saturday. I went and added it into the message. But at the end of it, Bette Midler, and she's grown up from the time she was a little girl with her friend. I'm probably going to butcher the story. But the friend ends up, married, pregnant, has a little girl. The husband runs out on the wife. The lady ends up, I think, getting cancer.
Yeah.
And is dying. And she's in the hospital dying, and she's all alone. And Bette Midler comes and finds her in the hospital. And she's just like, I just want to go home. Take me out of here. And so Bette Midler's like just beside herself. And she walks out to the hospital bed. She checks her out. She brings her back to her home that's on the beach. And the woman sits, at her house, and she, dies. But as I was watching that, it was so moving. And every one of us have seen these kinds of stories. I told another story of, it's an astronaut movie, where these young guys were often an astronaut, and they were going to have to sacrifice themselves to save the whole planet.
Yeah.
And the one guy was a young astronaut. And so they were I think there was 3 of them in the pod. And so they were trying to bring in all their family members before they die, because they know they're gonna die.
Yeah.
And so the one young guy, he had gotten married like 2 years before he had left, and his wife had gotten pregnant right before he left. And he'd never even seen his son, met him, wasn't there or anything. And so when they brought his young wife to the TV screen, and she's holding their little baby, and he's sitting there, and they got like 10 minutes before he's going to die, and he's sitting there trying to talk to his son and tell his son and tell his wife, and they're just breaking up. Man, you feel this thing like grip you in the back of your throat and on the inside. That's what God felt when he found us dying.
Wow.
And so because of that, because he felt that, he was unwilling to impute our sin to us.
Yeah.
Right? And so everybody can think of a story. Go back and watch Beaches. I told another story too, where there was this young girl in the UK who had gotten cancer. And she was like one of like 6 children. And so she was in a room by herself. A horrible story. The family suffers. They're all alone. Well, this little girl, she was like 12 or 13. We feel sorry for them. Listen, man, let me tell you something. The Holy Spirit does something inside of these children and manifests an overcoming life in them. They feel sorry for us. And so they had this headlong, God does not forsake these little kids in these situations. We judge it by their suffering. God is in them, strengthening them. They have a greater joy than we have. But there's like this life-sized mirror that was in the girl's room, and the girl had written on the back of the mirror with a magic marker from top to bottom. And she wrote this long thing to her family, just talking to them about, what they felt and how she was okay and how she was going to be okay. And she just went through this whole thing ministering to them because she knew how they were going to be suffering. Man, when I found that story, it like cracked me up. Like you just find your eyes welling up.
Yeah.
You just find your lip will tremble. You just feel something. That's what God felt when he found us dying. That's what Jesus felt when he come upon Lazarus in the grave. And it says that he wept. And it says that he was rent in the deepest part of his bowels. That's God. And so when he found Lazarus, that's us. And he found us dying. Man, he was rent on the inside with something in him that said, no, with every ounce of his being. So God, not willing to impute our sin to us, not willing that we should die, not willing that we should perish, not willing that he would be in all eternity without the ones he loves, not willing that he would live forever without us there for him to love us with every ounce of his being, not willing for that, didn't impute our sin to us.
And
And he raised us from the dead.